So we're live with U.S. Senator Kelly Ayotte, and this is the Voters First series that we are doing in partnership with AARP of New Hampshire. So remind me to ask you some Social Security questions because that's top on their agenda this year. But first, thank you for coming in. Your opponent, Governor Hassan, declined to do so. So why do you bother to sit down with people who may ask you tough questions?
I think that is the New Hampshire way, and important because, I've gone to ed boards that I know are not necessarily in my favor, but I think it's really important to answer questions from these kinds of opportunities here but I've also done town halls. I've done like 50 since I've been in office, where you just go there and you don't know what question you're going to get, but people come in and ask you, and I just think that's an important part of our tradition here in New Hampshire, especially when we think about, our first in the nation role. I mean, we ask our presidential candidates to do it, and so I think all of our candidates to be accessible and answer questions.
Right. I won't have you speculate on why your opponent chose not to come in here, but you have been endorsed by this newspaper.
Yes.
And also by the Telegraph of Nashua.
Yes.
And the Portsmouth Herald.
Yes.
Which were going to cause us to withdraw our support for you because
Yes.
something must be wrong. But fortunately, the Boston Globe and as of today, the New York Times
has
have both endorsed Governor Hassan,
Yes.
which is proper for out-of-state papers to get involved in.
Yeah, I
in
haven't
state
quite
races.
figured out, I thought we were representing New Hampshire, so the New York Times and the Boston Globe, I'm happy to get the New Hampshire endorsements.
It's quite unusual, I think, and Kevin's been around for a while too, that the Telegraph, the Union Leader, and the Portsmouth Herald would all be on the same page with an important political endorsement. Does that tell you anything? Were you shocked, surprised, or just?
Well, I obviously, I was pleasantly happy and surprised because, I think thinking about the Telegraph, the Union Leader, Portsmouth Herald, all really important papers in our state, and I don't all share the same editorial viewpoint, and don't necessarily always share my viewpoint. So I thought that that, to me, I was really happy with that. But I think the overall point I hope people take is that I work really hard at this job, try to understand and do my homework. Mm-hmm. And then I also have a very bipartisan record of looking for ways to find common ground to solve problems and get things done. And that's really why I want to run again, because we've got some big problems and challenges that need to be addressed. And making sure that New Hampshire's views and our voice, especially as I think about, that independence and that fierce independence in New Hampshire, making sure that's represented in the Senate, and especially, thinking about the Oval Office. I mean, making sure that we stand up if we don't think it's right from either side, but also look for ways to work together to solve problems, because we've got challenges, fiscal state of the country, issues we need to address to make it better and easier to create good jobs here, national security challenges. All of these things are going to take someone who I hope not only has the understanding, experience, but can bring people together, and that's what I try to do.
You mentioned being bipartisan, and I mentioned at the beginning that Social Security is an issue. And
Yes.
And how, in what looks to be divided or more divided Washington, how are you going to accomplish what you say you want to accomplish with Social Security, which, if I understand it, is to maintain the system, but there must be some increases for younger people, such as yourself, not your mom. She's on Social Security.
No, my mom's already on Social Security and Medicare.
So, A, what is your plan to maintain Social Security? And B, how the heck are you going to get this done if you have a split in Washington as we have now?
Well, I think this is a really important issue. I mean, my mother is on Medicare and Social Security, but I had was blessed to have my grandparents, my grandfather, who's a World War II veteran who lived, well into his 90s, and my meme as well into her 90s. And, she was a widow at a young age and worked on the railroad. And if she and my grandfather didn't have Social Security, there's no way they would have been able to, live that quality of life in their later years and have an opportunity to participate in their great-grandchildren and their grandchildren's lives. So I think this is a critical issue, and it's going to take the kind of bipartisanship. And I've always used the example of how Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill worked together. And I think that's an example where the two parties, you had the president of one party and the Speaker of the House from another party, they came together and preserved Social Security and strengthened it for decades. And they did that by a compromise which increased the cap, and then they gradually, over a long period of time without impacting anyone obviously at or near retirement, gradually raised the retirement age. So that's an example of how people can work together. And so I'm someone who's going to want to look for ways, whether it's issues of raising the cap or means testing, other ways that we make sure that this program is strong and that people understand that if you're receiving Social Security now, often this is used as a scare tactic with seniors, that people like me, I want to make sure that we're not going to impact your retirement, that you know it's going to be there, and that if you're near retirement, it's going to be there. But we need to engage the younger people in this discussion too, because I ask a lot of young people whether they think Social Security is going to be there, and they're just not sure about it, because they're coming up to speed with the numbers that in 2034, if we take no action, Social Security goes into a position where there could be up to a 21% cut for people. So that's why this cries out for action. It has to be bipartisan, but we have an example we can set. It may not be the exact formula that Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill applied, but we know that if we come together and compromise around, a bipartisan solution, that's the way we're going to do this. And we have to stop using this as, one of those political scare tactics where instead of talking about solutions and figuring out what we're going to do about it.
Well, Senator, both major party candidates, not the one that the union leader was smart enough to endorse, but the other two, have said nothing wrong with Social Security, everything's fine. So with either Trump or Clinton in the White House, how are you going to rally bipartisan, any kind of support to get Social Security addressed?
Well, to say it's fine is to ignore the numbers. And I think one of the reasons AARP is focused on this issue is because they've seen the numbers, the report from the trustees that aren't Republicans or Democrats. They're just the people who, look at the strength and the actuarial strength of Social Security. In 2034, you go into a deficiency position. So, I think that people like me hopefully can call upon the next president to say, along with groups like AARP, that there is a desire on a bipartisan basis not to get to this precipice where decisions become harder and people worry then about the strengthening and Social Security being there if we keep putting off decisions to 2034. That's a lot. That's not a responsible thing to do. So I hope that certainly, no matter what the presidential candidates are saying now, that they will put this on the agenda because they owe it to the American people and to the seniors and those who are planning their retirement security to do it.
I'm going to veer a little bit into politics before I let Kevin, who gets paid the big bucks to write this up and ask questions, takes over. But you have said that you are not supporting or going to vote for the top of your ticket, that you intend to write in the name of the vice presidential candidate, Mike Pence.
Yes.
So are you going to prove that for us?
Prove it for you. Meaning
Meaning
take a selfie of my ballot?
Yeah.
Sure, if people are, when I say I'm going to do something, I'll do it. So, I don't expect to go into vote and do something different than I've told people that I'm going to do.
Has the selfie issue, and that was kind of a gotcha question.
Yeah.
I want to get your reaction, but the whole selfie thing, and you've been Attorney General in the state of New Hampshire, and the Secretary of State here argued very much against selfies being allowed in the ballot booth, and it's split around the country. Did you or do you have a position on that?
You know, I can't say I've had a position on that.
Well, here you go.
I
You-
think
You're
if
now being
people-
blackmailed into
let me just-
taking a
And
picture of your
obviously,
ballot.
Gardner's going to the U.S. Supreme Court. The next U.S. senator from New Hampshire is going to be watching if the court accepts that.
Let me
Since
just say,
27 states.
I mean, I have so much respect for Bill Gardner. I mean, he is an icon of this state in terms of what he's done to preserve our first in the nation primary. So there's, as I think about our election process, I have great respect for Bill. But on this one, I would say that, you know, there is this ability of people to be able to let them know individually what they've done. I mean, there's a First Amendment ability to express yourself. And so as long as they're not revealing what other people do, you know, I don't necessarily have an objection to people releasing what they do in the ballot area, as long as they're not interfering with anyone else's right to vote.
Well, it was initially banned showing your ballot because of pressure from bosses.
Union.
And union bosses
Right.
and management bosses to say to their employees, you're going to vote for this way for this
Yeah.
candidate, and you're going to prove it by showing us your ballot. And that's why it's against the law.
No,
or has been.
I can understand that. But if we have a voluntary situation where someone is clearly doing this of their own free will and they're
How are
not,
you gonna tell?
and they're not interfering with them, well, if there's evidence of coercion of any time in the ballot, then there are separate laws that allow us to, you know, go after that, I think, criminally. So we should enforce those. If we ever had evidence that anyone was basically pressuring someone to vote a certain way, regardless of whether they put their ballot out there, we should be going after those cases.
So you do like Justin Timberlake?
I do like Justin Timberlake. What do you mean?
He got in trouble in his state for taking a selfie. with
Oh,
his
of his ballot, yeah.
Early voting has taken over across the country. Massachusetts this year, for the first time, has early voting. Do you have any thoughts on early voting, plus or minus?
I don't. I think that, you know, this is one certainly where, you know, Bill Gardner, I would defer to what he thinks is the best thing to do. We need to make sure people have the access to be able to vote. And I know under the federal framework, you have to be either early voting or same day. So, you know, we've made a choice here, as I understand it. And so I don't necessarily, I just want to make sure that, yes, people have access and the right, you know, to exercise their right to vote, and that it be done in a way here that's administered fairly. And so I think that I have a lot of confidence in
So
Secretary Gardner on some of his recommendations
Same
on
day-
these
if
issues.
If it's same-day voting, then you can't have early voting?
You don't have to.
You don't have to. You don't have to.
You have to
You have to
do it.
have one or the other
That's the federal.
federally. So you have to have, as I understand it,
Really? If you don't have same-day voting, you have to have early
Yes.
voting?
You have to
Yes.
have-
You have to have
yes.
one or the other. Now, I'm not, you know, let me just confess, I'm not an expert on federal election law, unlike Bud Fitch, who I know quite well, who is more of an expert, who's my head of my state office
We'll
and
have to ask him, 'cause we're
and
doing a
worked.
story on
Yes.
early voting.
Yes, and certainly he's much more of an expert than
And
me.
remember, Bud was at the Attorney General's office.
Yeah.
When Judd Gregg got the exception for New Hampshire from the motor voter law.
Right.
And that was part of the deal.
Part of
Meaning,
it was,
Part of the deal was the 6 states that want the exception for motor voter,
right,
you need to adopt same-day voter
yeah.
registration.
And that was
Which they
something
did.
he worked with
Which
Bill
we did.
Gardner on.
Exactly.
So Judd worked with Bill
Yep.
Gardner on this
Yep.
because,
Yeah.
so that's why I say Bill is really the one that's the most knowledgeable about this.
See, you didn't expect any of this, did you?
No, this is very off, you know, what I
Not
thought
what
we'd
I'm talking
be
about.
talking about. But, you know, happy to talk about it.
Get back on the wall, Kelly.
I do have a
I should
question
have brought
for
Bud here. He could have answered these questions better than
We'll
me.
get back to that.
Yeah.
Keeping on the politics here. You know, you've been around for a while. You live here. You grew up here. You were a homicide prosecutor,
Yes.
attorney general.
I was born here, too.
Yes. What we've seen in this election, and I see it in my email inbox every day. Craven Kelly, Elizabeth Warren here saying that you're weak. On a personal
Yeah,
level.
that was an amusing one.
Yeah. Well, how does it, on a personal level, take us behind the scenes? How does that impact you?
You know, it does. I have to tell you, I was born here, raising my 2 children in Nashua. My husband has a small business in Merrimack. As you know, I commute back and forth every week in terms of my job in the Senate and live here. And so there's lots of people that come in from Washington and want to say all kinds of names and think that's, suddenly going to change the perspectives of people in New Hampshire. But I really don't think that is how people in the state, view this process. And so to me, I really don't think about it because I know, listen, I'm in my local market basket. I'm out, my kids are playing, soccer, they're out in the fields with the parents. And, when they say things like that, I think it just shows you how disconnected the people who push that, you get these like campaign operatives from Washington and using language like that. And it's just very disconnected, I think, from the people of New Hampshire.
35 different attack ads against you in this campaign.
Oh, it's been
different.
This is what's happening in this campaign. It's what has happened, and just let me tell you what I think, which is that Governor Hassan was recruited in this race by power brokers in Washington like Harry Reid and Chuck Schumer, who want control in the Senate. And you see the ads on your TV. Harry Reid's super PAC spent over $15 million attacking me. You've seen Mike Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York City, spent over $7 million. The federal employees unions who just want the status quo, they've spent over $7 million. Hillary Clinton's super PAC is now spending millions of dollars attacking me. And really what it comes down to is, I will stand up to the status quo on both sides of the aisle. They would like someone who I believe that Governor Hassan will be, which is to be a rubber stamp for their agenda. And I don't think that, I think New Hampshire needs someone who's going to be independent, who will stand up. By the way, not just I'll stand up to the other side, but I've stood up to my own party when I don't think it's taking us in the right direction. And so, yes, the airwaves are flooded with lots of misleading ads. And when, pretty quickly into this race, I offered Governor Hassan this People's Pledge to keep all these ads out, for us, how we would conduct ourselves in this race, and she didn't want to take it.
Now, what was the People's Pledge, and were there any legitimate reasons from Governor Hassan's side for not doing it? Wasn't it you offered something and she didn't like the way it was tweaked?
Well, here's the thing. There is a People's Pledge that was in place in the Mass Senate race between Scott Brown and Elizabeth Warren. And, Elizabeth Warren, like one of Governor Hassan's huge supporters. And they came to, it had been drafted by academic experts, I believe. So they signed this pledge. It was an agreement that basically both sides would be penalized if outside groups came in either attacking their opponent or supporting them.
Penalized how?
The campaign would have to donate to a charity, a similar amount. And so what happened is that most of the outside money stayed out because they didn't want to penalize either candidate. So what happened, that was in place. Then when Scott Brown ran against Senator Shaheen, actually, she offered the same language that was in place to Scott Brown, and he didn't accept it. But here's what's interesting to me. So that language has already worked. It is the language that was in place. I offered the same language to Governor Hassan. She did not sign it and sent this counter pledge with the Nashua Telegraph described a poison pill in it. And it basically, because I think we know why she didn't want to sign it, because there has been so many groups. You cited 35 negative attack ads. I don't even know how many at this point, from the individuals that I talked about that want this to be about power and control in the Senate instead of about who's going to be New Hampshire's independent voice. So, she can, obviously she wanted to lawyer this thing to death, but there was already something that worked. And I think it just shows that she never really wanted to do it. And that's because if you look at the spending in this race, it's an astounding amount of spending. And on our side, we've been outspent, but that's okay. I think this is going to come down to the people of New Hampshire. They're going to decide this, not Harry Reid or Chuck Schumer or anyone else.
It would have been about $75 million to New Hampshire charities if you followed the
Well, it
rules
would
of the
have,
People's
right.
Pledge.
It would have been,
$75 million.
imagine what we could do for the heroin epidemic with that.
$75 million.
Yeah, or homelessness, or our veterans care, or any of the issues we care about.
So what's been your biggest screw-up to date as a U.S. Senator? And I don't mean on the debate stage, I mean something that you've done or failed to do in Washington that you regret doing or not doing. Have you made any mistakes, Senator Ayotte?
Well, I think none of us is perfect, so, I think what I've tried to do is,
I don't have a gotcha at the end of this. I'm just-
no, I
I'm
don't
just
think,
curious.
I don't think any of us is perfect, so, but what I've tried to do is to, really look at each issue, stand up on the issue, depending on, first of all, the feedback of my constituents, and what I think the policy issue does for the country and our state. So,
Would you do anything different on the, you were part of the initial Gang of 10 trying to come up with comprehensive
on the immigration issue?
reform. Would you got your head handed to you on that one.
I did.
So would you approach it
Well,
in
there's a lot of
different
things
way?
that, people are critical that you do, but one thing that I do know is that on a lot of these issues, to sit there in your camp and do nothing about them means nothing gets solved or done. And if you're afraid of criticism, then you'll never make a decision, and therefore will stay in the status quo, and therefore our problems will never get solved. So on the immigration bill, yeah, that was not a perfect bill, but as I look at the issues and challenges we face, we do need to address illegal immigration, and that had some strong pieces on illegal immigration, doubling the amount of fencing, doubling the amount of border agents, creating an entry-exit system, which needs to be done because 40% of the people who are here illegally are actually overstaying a visa, creating a better stronger, more uniform E-Verify system.
What's wrong with E-Verify? Because it seems like a pretty simple thing where an employer has to run the name of somebody through
Yeah,
a
as my
system.
understanding is it's not fully applied universally, and you need to have a universal system. And that sometimes it's not always as easy as I understand for, you'd need a more robust system to do it. And I understand that it's not as easy sometimes for employers when things get, so I think there needed to be improvements to that. So that bill contained that piece. So it needs to be workable for employers, and then it also has to be a system that applies essentially to all employers if it's going to work. So the other piece is the legal immigration issue. So we're a country of immigrants, and I think there needs to be reforms to our legal immigration system. That
What should the quotas be on an annual basis, on the number of
I think the
legal immigrants?
quotas should be driven based on the economic needs of the United States of America, so that we can ensure that the immigrants who are coming here, number one, that they're going to help us and they want to be part of our country. I believe they should learn English. I believe they should, want to be part of helping us grow our economy. And so we should be looking at the economic needs of America as we establish those quotas. And then we also have folks that come here and are educated in our best education institutions, and letting them stay when there are gaps that we have in our workforce to help us fill those gaps. To me, that makes sense. And so we should look at our demographic issues and how we're going to grow our workforce in establishing those quotas. It really should be about the strength of America as we look at those issues.
Let me ask you about another piece of legislation that you have really made a centerpiece of your campaign, the Comprehensive Addiction
Yes.
and Recovery Act. I've asked everyone to try and explain the Senate appropriations process to me, and you really have to be a lawyer to understand it. But as I understand it, no money from CARA has actually hit the streets in New Hampshire as of today, right?
Yeah, yes, let me explain this process just so you understand. So, you probably have heard of the Violence Against Women Act. So that is, first of all, you pass the policy measures. The Violence Against Women Act was passed, and it talked about the policies that are contained within it, whether it's supporting our domestic violence coalition, whether the laws that are contained in the Violence Against Women. The CARA Act was not an appropriations bill. It was an authorizing act. So it passed the laws, the federal law that is the framework that is funded by the appropriations process. So it passed, what we believe the best federal response to help state and local efforts. Obviously it's about the state and local efforts in prevention, treatment, and recovery. And then once you pass an authorizing law, you fund it. So just two things that need to be understood is the appropriations process is the funding process. Last year, in the appropriations bill, there was a 46% increase in funding directed toward opiates. That was $320 million. So some of that money will be going into help put the CARA framework in place as a starting point. Then we're in the appropriations process for this year. That process and what was passed out of committee actually has another increase of $460 million allocated toward focusing on the opiate issue. That has not passed yet because the Appropriations Committee has 12 appropriations bills. They passed each of them this year out of committee. Most of them, I think almost all of them, were bipartisan as they passed out of committee. The Senate Democrats blocked every single funding bill that came out of the appropriations from being considered on the Senate floor. And every single one, including the military appropriations on multiple occasions. So because of that, we had to go back to a continuing resolution, which is only funding the government till November. And in that continuing resolution, usually what a continuing resolution is just status quo of where we are. And one thing we did get in the continuing resolution is some seed money for CARA itself, which is unusual in a continuing resolution because usually it's just status quo. So
and that's about $7 million.
That's in there, but it's because it only goes till November.
Right.
And so we are going to have to, when we get back in the Senate, we are going to have to ensure that the CARA is fully funded. But the fact we got seed money to start that for the period of the continuing resolution, I think bodes well. There's bipartisan support for this bill. It passed the Senate 92-2. And so that's the process by which, building on what we did last year in the funding that's already in the base level, the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act is how this should work. So no, the federal piece, we just passed it this summer. Sure, we're going to have to continue to fight to make sure it's fully funded. But, we passed a law addressing this. Took us 3 years to do it. It was done the right way. We went to the stakeholders, the first responders, the addiction experts, the prevention experts. We brought all those people to the table, those of us who led this effort. And including, I did this in New Hampshire, in bringing New Hampshire's feedback. And so the federal framework we have is one that I hope will be the best way to help the state and local efforts with the best evidence-based programs, obviously with enough local decision making to be taken into account in all this. So that's what happens with this. And so to say somehow that it's not significant because the funding wasn't attached to it, no authorization bill has funding attached to it because there's a separate process to fund things.
So let me ask you this. Are you frustrated with Republican leadership for not making this a bigger issue? There's the $7 million, the seed money, and the continuing resolution. We're hearing this week that the resolution might run out before any of that money even gets here. This was a bipartisan issue. Senator Shaheen supported it. You had senators from all across the country supporting this, saying this is an emergency. We need this money.
Okay, so can I just put something in perspective? Mm-hmm. I think this is a very bipartisan issue. And the people that I worked on the CARA bill with, there were 2 of us who were Republicans that led this and 2 Democrats. And we have worked together on the funding issues, on everything, and it's been very bipartisan.
So why is the
so
money
I don't
not
think
here,
you should.
Is the question.
Well, why is the money not here? There have been a number of federal funds that have come here, and we can get you the whole list. We'll get you the whole list of the money that came from the prior funding process. we're still in the process of getting this money here to build on what was done. Is there more to do? Yes. But we can get you a list of all the federal money that's come here. And by the way, there have been grants that have been available that have not been applied for here. And we can get you that list too, unfortunately. One pretty significant one that would have helped law enforcement. So I think, you know, to say that there's not support when the seed money is in the continuing resolution, and we're going to go back and fund, obviously, hopefully get this government funded for the longer period for at least the year. To me, I think there will have an opportunity to do it. I'm going to fight for it. I'll work with Senator Shaheen on it. But it really is one that there is a strong bipartisan effort. And it does obviously take some time. And let me just say, you know, as we stand here today, you know, having talked to our legislative leadership, I was just talking to Jeb Bradley and Chuck Morse about this the other day. Even the money that the legislature allocated, the most recent amount of $3 million, two of those million have not gone out the door. So I've heard a lot from, you know, people concerned about even the money that has been allocated, getting it out the door at the state level more quickly to those who are working in treatment and prevention and recovery.
How much money do you envision for the CARA Act on an annual basis?
It authorizes $181 million.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
And that would build on what is already in the underlying appropriations.
Switching gears yet again, and not political at all, but are you satisfied with how the FBI has handled the Clinton email investigation?
The way the FBI has handled this investigation is, it's really troubling, because as a former prosecutor, it seems to me that there were two different sets of rules applied here. One for you know, Secretary Clinton, and a different one that would be applied to anyone else. And that's what bothers me most about it as a prosecutor. And you see many examples of what happened. I mean, the immunity deals that were given. The fact that Director Comey announced not only that there was not evidence, but that no reasonable prosecutor would prosecute under these facts, I challenge to find another situation. I can't think of another situation where the investigator would come out and preclude the prosecution decision himself by saying no reasonable prosecutor would find a crime here. As a former prosecutor myself, the way way cases are investigated is the police go investigate them, and then you have the evidence. As Attorney General, I would look at that evidence and see whether there's a crime committed. And then we would make a determination whether a charge is brought. And by the way, the fact that no grand jury was convened was surprising in all of this. The fact that you would give immunity to people instead of convening a grand jury and requiring people to come before the grand jury to testify on something of such seriousness. So there were many irregularities in this investigation. And what worries me in the big picture is that the message is, and the concern is that we need a justice system that is equally applied to everyone. And this was one that, to me, there was a different set of standards applied on this investigation than if it had been an average person who was investigated for the same allegations.
When you were AG, you'd never let the cops talk to us first, at all, ever.
That's true. Well, because you know what? I wanted them to conduct the investigation, and then, you know, we'll determine what evidence is there and whether there's a crime committed. That is, the police investigate it, the prosecutor reviews it, and looks whether there's evidence, probable cause of evidence of a crime. But there are so many irregularities in this investigation. And by the way, let me just say, you know, Governor Hassan has said, you know, well, Hillary Clinton has said it's a mistake, and, you know, she wouldn't do it again. This is well beyond a mistake, okay? You know, I think I said this in the debate last night, but this is not like 2 + 2 = 5. This is about jeopardizing our national security, because she was Secretary of State, and, you know, there were classified emails we learned about even under the FBI's investigation. And, you know, this is information that could, if released, have an impact on our national security.
Should there be a special prosecutor named for this?
Well, the difficulty is that the special prosecutor law has changed. And so the way it is that the Attorney General would have to sign off on it. And so I think it's very difficult under the process to do that. If there were a different process, if there were, the way the process is set up right now, I just don't see how it would happen.
Well, you may not know this, but the FBI has just announced a further investigation of Hillary Clinton's emails.
I didn't know that.
3 minutes ago.
Oh, I was going to
Yeah.
say, Liz, you didn't tell me this. No,
We're on top of the news.
you are. I was breaking during this.
Well, actually, breaking is Trump's got a live rally downtown, which is
For people watching, we have that story on our website, unionleader.com, about the emails.
FBI.
So the
Yep.
FBI is conducting another investigation. Well, I
They,
hope they conduct it in a different way than they conducted the last one.
They notified Congress it will investigate new emails found in probe of Clinton's private server. New emails found. Probably got them from Assange.
Yeah, I don't know
But
where.
he's got to have a Wi-Fi hotspot because Ecuador pulled the plug on his
I
internet.
mean, can you imagine setting up a private server as the Secretary of State? I mean, that in and of itself, you think about it, that in and of itself shows, level of intent that didn't seem to be taken into account by Director Comey.
I do want to ask you a couple of questions that we have coming live, and sorry, Kevin.
That's all right. That's okay. Go ahead.
So this comes from Elizabeth Green, who says, I've been seeing those tax and hassle signs on the road, and I'm glad someone is talking about taxes and spending. What would Kelly do about debt and wasteful spending?
Thank you for the question. There is actually a big difference in this race between Governor Hassan and I when it comes to taxes. And, because she does have a long history, even going back to her time as Senate Majority Leader, where she was one of the original sponsors of the LLC income tax that was done essentially in the middle of the night without public input that impacted 100,000 of our small businesses here in New Hampshire. And eventually they passed that, but there was such an outrage by our small businesses that even though she defended it 6 months later, eventually the legislature, of course, overturned that tax on our small businesses. And we saw the same pattern with her budget veto, where the legislature, seeing that our business taxes were getting too high for competitiveness for the state, made the decision to make a slight reduction in business taxes. And of course, she vetoed the budget on that basis, calling it dishonest, and then saying it would drive a $90 million hole in it. And then again, essentially, now takes credit for those business tax reductions. So, she has a long history of proposing taxes and fee increases. I am someone who wants to make sure you can keep more money in your pocket, and I can only imagine what her approach would be in the nation's capital. So hold on to your wallets if that happens. When it comes to debt, this is one where we do have to get our fiscal house in order. I've supported a balanced budget amendment. I have also worked on the budget committee. We passed a budget, and that budget before the Democrats blocked the appropriations process was the first budget that balanced in 14 years. And so we have to, every committee I serve on, I look for ways to save money, whether on the Armed Services Committee, eliminating wasteful weapons programs like the Missile to Nowhere, whether it's on the Homeland Security Committee, even like an agency essentially that produces government reports that you could just get yourself online, that doesn't need to exist, that I've introduced bipartisan legislation to eliminate. So I've looked for ways to cut spending. We also are going to have to, as we look at the big picture, we're going to have to make sure that we work to sustain Medicare and Social Security, because 2/3 of our budget are Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid. And if you don't look at that piece, and make sure that we're figuring out ways, as we talked about earlier, to make those financially viable and strengthen going forward, then you can't get the big picture fiscal state together. And let me mention one other issue. We've got to do tax reform, because we have a very stupid tax code, including like our business tax code, which we have the highest taxes in the developed world. And so simplifying, lowering rates, keeping money in the United States of America, and then making sure the companies who have it parked overseas, let's bring it back home. That'll bring more revenue in the Treasury, and it's also going to help American jobs.
What's the amount of waste, would you guess, in the Pentagon? And how do you attack
Yeah,
it?
there's actually, there is waste in the Pentagon, because what's happened is that the teeth to tail ratio has gotten out of whack. When I say teeth to tail, we're cutting the teeth and the tail's getting bigger, meaning the Pentagon bureaucracy. So what we're doing on the Armed Services Committee, I will say under the leadership of Chairman McCain, is that we have been putting in the defense authorization requirements of their reducing the overhead of the Pentagon. And there's been some pushback on it, but it needs to happen because there have been so many more positions created in the Pentagon versus the people on the front lines. And so I think there is a lot we can streamline there. And also reforming the acquisition process, because there's a lot of examples where weapons programs we shouldn't waste money on that get done. There's staggering, yeah. So there is billions that can be saved there, and that resource needs to go to the front lines of the people who are really defending the nation and on the front lines.
Well, everybody says that all the time, but nothing gets done. So
well, I
what
think
is Ayotte going to do?
What Ayotte's going to do is we are going to continue to work to reform this process, and we've supported in the defense authorization. We've had pushback on it. We literally have numbers that they have to reduce headquarters at Pentagon, and that's what we're going to do and streamline it, because it's just they've created more positions in the bureaucracy that we don't need. So we're literally going to reduce some of those positions, and let me just say that Senator McCain's been very aggressive on that. I support him on it, and we need to do more there.
Kevin has a question.
Kevin, we're not going to let him talk.
Equal pay for equal work, you've
Yes.
talked about it, you filed legislation.
I did.
Similar to New Hampshire.
Yep.
The Democrats say in your office that a woman makes only 67 cents for $1 paid to a male employee. Are they manipulating the numbers? Can you, is that?
Yes, I pay, I certainly, first of all, I'm the first woman attorney general. I firmly believe in equal pay for equal work as the mother of a daughter, and so I pay the individuals in my office based on their experience, their qualifications, and their capabilities. And I value the work of the women in my office who do a phenomenal, phenomenal job. So I introduced legislation in the Senate based on what I think New Hampshire has done. They passed an equal pay law that I think made sense. And so what happens too much in Washington is you've got this sort of, the Democrats keep introducing the same proposal every time that gets voted down, because there's a lot of concerns that their proposal is going to impact the ability to give merit pay. And I'm kind of a fan of merit pay because, sometimes women in the workforce, we're outperforming the men, and we want merit pay too. And
So the U.S. Senate pay should change and be merit-based?
we'll all get, obviously we all get paid the same in
Is
the
McCain
Senate.
aware of this?
Yeah. He'll be worried about that, no. But so I introduced in New Hampshire, basically looking at a New Hampshire solution and said, hey, why don't we do it the way New Hampshire did it? So I've introduced that at the national level because I think it preserves merit pay, but it also makes sure that there's clarity in the enforcement of our equal pay laws.
This is not a crazy hypothetical. Hillary Clinton gets elected president and you get reelected in the U.S. Senate. What's the first thing you'll cooperate and work together on to get done?
Well, I think it obviously will depend on, what she pushes forward. But geez, I hope we can, let me just say some local issues that I'd like to, I hope we continue to work together on this, the sustaining of addressing the heroin epidemic, building and making sure that what we did on an overwhelming bipartisan basis, CARA, is appropriately funded and administered properly. And let me also say that I want us to figure out this veterans care issue, because this is an issue Senator Shaheen and I have worked so much together on. We've worked to try to give veterans choice to be able to go to their...
With the VA?
Well, I think there's still many problems with the VA. I mean, there's some great people that work in Manchester that do a really, and I've met them and I admire them, but there's still too much lack of accountability at the VA. People who got bonuses, who committed misconduct in the manipulation of those wait lists, they got to keep their bonuses. Some are trying to come back to work, and this administration is not doing anything about holding them accountable. I got legislation passed to claw back bonuses of people who commit misconduct, and guess what? More accountability in the VA. I got it passed out of the VA committee, got it passed out of the Homeland Security Committee. I went to the Senate floor to get a vote on it, and I was blocked by the Senate Democrats because they were missives being sent out by the federal employees unions about, block this legislation. That's where the status quo is not acceptable. There needs to be accountability for those who commit misconduct and aren't doing right by our veterans. But the VA Choice Program, we need to get it right. And our veterans should be able to go in New Hampshire, because we don't have a full service hospital, to their local providers, and they shouldn't have to deal with the bureaucracy that they're dealing with right now in getting those appointments. And this is one that I'm going to put at the top of my priority list, working with Senator Shaheen to get this right, because they should not have to wait in the way they're waiting. They shouldn't have to deal with like this third party where they call and they're waiting for an appointment. There's a much simpler way to do it, a much better way to do this for our veterans.
Given the choice, wouldn't most veterans rather work and be served by the VA rather than other hospitals and other providers?
It depends on the veterans. Why don't we give them the choice? We don't have a full service hospital.
No, I understand that, but it's been my experience that most of the veterans like the Veterans Administration hospitals because they were designed for the veterans. And the New Hampshire used to have a full service.
Right.
Got downsized. A lot of conservatives said, well, that's great because just give them a card and let them go to wherever they want. The veterans didn't want to go wherever they wanted. Now they'll take Veterans Choice rather than a bus ride to Massachusetts.
Why,
or something.
having to go into Massachusetts.
So, but why aren't you guys, you and Shaheen and Custer and,
fighting for full service?
Yeah.
We have been.
yeah?
Wow.
We've
both
done a
senators-
great job.
Both Senator Shaheen and I, probably the first piece of legislation that we introduced was to have a full service hospital, both of us, when we got to the Senate. But the issue is that we haven't been able to convince the people to build a full service hospital here going where we were. So we're both still committed to a full service hospital, but we're not going to make our veterans wait. Even if we have a full service hospital, it would take time to implement it if we got it passed tomorrow. So why do our veterans have to get in a bus and go somewhere else? So they should be able to go in their local community easily. And the VA, unfortunately, we're in a position where the way this program's set up, it's been set up much too bureaucratically, and we should simplify it, make it easier. And for our North Country veterans, even if we have a full service hospital, the choice access actually may be better for them, so that they don't have to even drive to Manchester. If they could go to the Androscoggin Hospital, so we have to think about the whole state. And Senator Shaheen and we've been absolutely committed to full service, but the fact that we were able to get a provision in the VA reform law that allowed New Hampshire veterans to go locally, we have to get it fixed right.
So why wouldn't the first thing that Ayotte and Shaheen did if Hillary gets in office is to go see?
full service, sure.
Yeah.
Happy to do that, yeah.
The,
I want to get it right one way or the other to make sure our veterans have the access to the care. They earned it, defending our nation.
one thing you've worked on, there's been some pushback, not in New Hampshire so much, but these protocols on sex assault on college campuses.
CASA, yeah. College campuses accountability.
Yeah.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about any progress you've made on that front and whether more can be done in the next Congress?
Yeah, we have a bill, it's bipartisan, like myself and Senator Rubio and others on the Republican end, and a number of Democrats who are supporting it. Basically, I'm a former prosecutor, and unfortunately, some of these situations with sexual assault on campus have not been treated as crimes. And so our bill really looks at this as, okay, this is a crime, so let's make sure it's investigated like a crime and treated properly, and there's understanding between the local, the school and local law enforcement. These are all things that, to me, making sure these are consistently and properly treated as the crimes they are is appropriate. And I think we've been growing the number of sponsors of this bill, so I'm optimistic that while we haven't yet gotten it, through the Senate, that the more support we get for it, we will do that.
How did it get this way?
How did what get?
How did it get the way that college campuses and college administrators could put this under the rug?
That you've got
It wasn't always this way, was it?
I don't know. I think that you get a situation where you see examples where the institution decides it's more important to protect the institution than to follow through on the crimes.
And now because
women
are more
I
vociferous.
think that there's been a greater understanding and hopefully more sunlight brought to the fact of what is that sexual assaults, that we've had, obviously, with the work even done by our own coalition of survivors coming forward and know that they'll be supported, and we have more progress to make there. But I think the fact that there's much more open discussion about these issues, and that people aren't going to accept institutions hiding sexual assault or not supporting those who are victims of sexual assault or properly investigating these cases, that to me, we are, I think, hopefully making improvements on that. We have more work to do, but I think about like the work I did even with the Catholic Church. Sometimes institutions, or what happened at Penn State, my alma mater, unfortunately, sometimes institutions are concerned that it's more important to protect the institution than the victim or the student.
Mm-hmm. This is kind of inside baseball question, but it is important for New Hampshire. If you get reelected, do you want to be in the College of Cardinals? Do you want to be an appropriator? And
College of Cardinals.
That's how it's sometimes referred to. The people who make the money decisions hold the purse string. In order to do that, you probably would have to leave armed services or foreign relations. Do you want to stay in the area expertise you're in?
Well, the committees that I serve on are actually committees where I've established some seniority and are of importance to New Hampshire and the nation. I mean, I chair the readiness subcommittee for the military for the entire nation, and I've actually gotten quite a bit of seniority on the Armed Services Committee when you look at the dais there. And then I serve on the Commerce and Science and Transportation Committee, and I chair the aviation subcommittee for the entire nation, anything impacting aviation. So that's obviously another pretty significant area. And in addition to that, I serve on Homeland Security, Government Oversight, I serve on Small Business and Entrepreneurship, and I serve on the Budget Committee. So I actually got to add another committee, so I have 5 committees that I serve on, which is a pretty strong committee portfolio. So as I look at it right now, I mean, each Congress you can switch committees, and I'll reevaluate the best way I can represent New Hampshire and be strong for New Hampshire. But as I look at the Armed Services Committee, this is one where we're the only state in the nation that has 2 members on the Armed Services Committee. And so if you look at the work that we've done, Senator Shaheen and I, for the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, or even our Guard, they're going to be the first Guard unit in the country to get the tanker in. And that's, I don't give us credit. We brought attention to their great work, but our Guard has been there refueling for every single conflict. They've done a phenomenal job, so they deserve to be the first Guard unit in the nation to receive that tanker. But obviously, this is one where Senator Shaheen and I will be able to highlight their great work together.
You mentioned all the committees you're on, and one of the attack ads against
Yes.
you is for lack of showing up at committee meetings. What's going on?
Well, this is one of those misleading attacks. First of all, I hope that people will look at my voting record, which is over 99%. And really, I commute back and forth every week between New Hampshire and Washington. And I serve on 5 committees. I added the Homeland Security Committee later because I was able to get on that committee as an additional committee. But unfortunately, they don't always deconflict these committees in Washington.
You mean more than one committee meets?
Yes, in fact, this is quite a frequent occurrence. And so what I do is I will pick the committee that I think is most important for me to be at. But when I'm not at another committee, I will have my staff attend the meeting, and I will also submit questions for the record, and I will get a briefing afterwards. So when you, in the last election cycle, looked at committee attendance among our delegation, you found I had the best committee attendance in the delegation. So I work very diligently to represent the people of New Hampshire, and I think this attack is very misleading.
Are you voting for Chris Sununu for governor?
Am I voting for Chris Sununu? Yes, I am.
Remember, the selfie.
How about Jim Lawrence?
Yes, I'll be voting for Jim Lawrence.
She's not voting for Ginter.
No, but
He's
she
not.
can-
He's not in my district.
You
Yeah,
can write him in. Something
I don't
like
think
that.
so.
Kevin, anything else?
I'm good, I think, yeah.
Kevin has to write all this stuff up.
Well,
Can I
Did you
just say
find-
also on, we talked a little bit about Armed Services Committee.
right, yes, please.
And, I think that is an important issue in this race because we have some great national security challenges. Obviously, the experience I've gotten, not only am I the wife of a combat veteran, but the experience that I've gotten on the Armed Services Committee is one where I've really focused on the security of this nation, whether it's in, the work that I've done over my whole term in the Senate to fight against the release of these dangerous terrorists from Guantanamo and the closure of Guantanamo. I've been one of the strongest critics against the Iran agreement. And if you look at the Iran's post-behavior on this agreement with even what's happened most recently, the imprisoning of our citizens and then trying to get more money out of us because of the imprisoning of our officials, the money, the cash relief that this administration has given Iran, that, by the way, they're now, they're supporting terrorism around the world, including the Houthi rebels in Yemen that are firing on our ships. I mean, this is a big difference in this race. Governor Hassan, of course, supports the Iran agreement, which I think is a dangerous agreement for the nation. And so I think the national security issues and contrasts in this race are important. And also the taxes and spending issues are very important. And I also think as you think about who's going to stand up to address changes that need to be made to the healthcare law with higher deductibles and costs that I'm hearing from constituents, I think there's a very big difference in this race.
Okay.
Do you think, the largest single source of campaign support to each of your campaigns is from Israel? The individual
Israel?
group? Right, theirs is called J Street, meaning theirs, meaning the Democratic.
Well, the Americans who
Right,
believe strongly in the relationship between our country and Israel.
and I guess given that's sort of the question. Given that Israel's not fond of this Iran deal and Hassan supports it wholeheartedly, does it surprise you that the Israeli lobby would be that supportive of it?
No, I think that they're Americans
Yep.
that support us, and so they support us for various issues. So I don't think you can characterize that support in one way. And I understand why Israel doesn't like the deal because, Iran's testing ballistic missiles, and one of them says in Hebrew that it wants to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. So, that's disturbing, and it's one of the reasons I've pushed back so hard, not only on this agreement, but on the ballistic missiles, which this administration has taken little, if any, action on, which I believe is dangerous for not only Israel, but our country.
So are they covering all their bases, the Israeli lobby in Washington, by giving to both?
I don't know. I'm not sure what Kevin's. I'm not sure what he's referring to, but these are Americans who are donating to us who I think probably could donate for any reason, could be on any issue. I'm not sure you can characterize them as being focused on any. I'm sure some have an interest in Israel, but I'm sure they have interests in any other issue, economic issues, or any other issues that any other American would be interested in. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to ask one more question, maybe a good closing question.
Yes.
And you were asked this at the debate, and I just wanted to ask it again to see if you had thought about it. They asked you if you're not sent back to the Senate, what would you do over the next 2 years?
Why would
Yeah.
it only be 2 years?
Yeah, I don't
question they
know.
asked.
2 years, you know.
What would you
She's
do
going
if
to run
you-
against Shaheen after.
Right,
No,
or-
She
I
can't get out of politics.
listen. I don't know. I'm going to sit down with my family like anyone else would, and then decide what we're going to do as a family. So, but I know one thing: no matter what happens, I love this state, and I will find a way to give back to New Hampshire in some way, whether it's local nonprofits or our school, anything, because I love to serve this state. So.
No offers from minor league baseball in the pitching regard?
Well, they're thinking about it,
I
but
would think so.
yeah. One of the funniest thing is that people sometimes would ask me if that was really me hitting in that ad. So yes, it was, because I don't have a DH. I wish I had Big Poppy, but had to pull that one off myself. And I got a lot of tips about my swing. I had a lot of people, keep your elbow up more. Keep your elbow up.
What was your average? What are you hitting?
I don't even know what my average is. It's probably not worthy of not worthy of any kind of real team being recruited by any team, I can assure you.
Well, thank you for enduring this.
Thank you for
Senator.
having me. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Thanks.
And good luck in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. About this.